You think I'm some kind of animal? The sound ripped through the night, sharp as broken glass. A tin plate clattered against the marble floor, scattering scraps of food. Amara froze where she was, crouched near the trash bins behind the grand Lockhart estate. The cold air bit through her thin uniform, and her hands trembled as she clutched a half-eaten piece of bread she'd pulled from the top of the garbage bag. Ethan Lockhart stood in the doorway, shirt sleeves rolled, face tight with fury. The motion lights painted him in silver and shadow, making him look less like a man and more like something carved from steel. I wasn't stealing, Amara stammered. It was just... He took a step closer. You were eating out of my trash. Her breath caught. She couldn't look him in the eye. Her cheeks burned, shame rising like fire through her throat. I hadn't eaten all day, she whispered. His laugh was short and bitter. Then maybe you should have asked instead of digging through garbage like a stray. Those words, like a stray, cut deeper than he knew. Because not 3 nights ago she had slept under a bridge, wrapped in a thrifted coat that still smelled faintly of someone else's perfume. She hadn't wanted pity. She just wanted to work, to stay quiet, to make it through the night without her stomach twisting in pain. Now, standing in the cold glow of his mansion, she felt smaller than ever. I'm sorry, Mr. Lockhart, she said softly, voice cracking. I'll leave right away. He turned, gesturing sharply toward the gate. Do that. And don't come back. You're fired. The door slammed behind him. For a moment there was only the hum of the wind, and the faint, desperate sound of Amara's breath breaking into quiet sobs. The next morning the Lockhart estate was all glass and silence again. The world of wealth had reset itself, as if the night before had been not more than a blemish to be scrubbed away. Ethan sat at his breakfast table, scrolling through financial reports, pretending he wasn't haunted by what he'd seen. He told himself he'd done the right thing. Discipline. Boundaries. You don't reward desperation. That's how people take advantage of you. That was what his father always said. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't forget the look in her eyes. Not the fear, not even the sadness, but the dignity that somehow survived beneath it. She hadn't begged. She'd just apologized and walked away, like a ghost of all the things he didn't want to feel. Sir, said his assistant Gregory, stepping into the room. The agency's asking if you'd like a replacement maid. Ethan's gaze stayed on his phone. No, not yet. Gregory nodded and left. For a long time, Ethan just sat there. The mansion felt unusually empty, like even the walls were ashamed of him. Across town, Amara wandered the gray streets of Atlanta, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Her uniform was still damp from last night's dew, and she tried not to cry as she checked her phone for job listings she couldn't afford to reach. She passed a bakery. The smell of bread made her stomach ache, but she kept walking. Pride was a fragile thing. She'd learned to hold on to it even when she had nothing else. By evening, she found herself near an old park where a few tents dotted the edge of a playground. She knew some of the people here, women from shelters, men who'd lost jobs and never found their way back. They nodded at her, and one woman offered her a spot near a small fire. Rough day? The woman asked. Amara smiled weakly. Something like that. As the night deepened, she pulled her coat tighter and stared at the stars. Somewhere in that cold sky, she imagined her mother's voice, soft, warm, telling her to keep her heart kind, even when the world wasn't. And that's when she saw it. A small shape limping near the shadows. A dog, ribs showing through its fur, nose pressed to the ground. Amara reached out a hand. Hey there, little one. The dog looked up, tail wagging faintly. She had no food, but she tore a piece from the stale bread she'd saved and placed it on the ground. The dog sniffed, then ate. Her chest ached. She recognized that kind of hunger. Tomorrow, she whispered, I'll bring you something better. Promise. She didn't know yet that this small act, feeding a stray, would change everything. The next morning, the Lockhart estate buzzed with quiet tension. Ethan had a meeting in an hour, but his security chief walked in looking uneasy. Sir, we found something odd on the night cameras. Ethan frowned. What is it? The guard played a clip on his tablet. There, in grainy black and white, was Amara. standing at the back gate at dawn, holding out her hand to feed the limping dog. Her movements were slow, tender, cautious. She didn't look around or try to steal. She just fed the animal, then left a small piece of bread by the fence before walking away. Ethan's jaw tightened. The guard hesitated. "You want me to report her for trespassing?" He didn't answer right away. Something twisted in his chest. "No," he said finally. "Leave it." But as the guard left, Ethan kept watching the video, again and again, until the edges of his anger started to crumble, revealing something far more uncomfortable underneath. Shame. He didn't know it yet, but the footage wouldn't stay private for long. The gardener had seen it too, and within 24 hours, that video would hit the internet. And when it did, the world would see a billionaire's cruelty and a maid's quiet grace. By noon, Ethan Lockhart's name was everywhere. Heartless billionaire fires Maid after finding her eating from trash. Video emerges. The woman he called a stray was feeding a dog she saved. Lockhart Empire in trouble as CEO faces public backlash. The news outlets feasted. The video, taken from his own security cameras, had gone viral overnight. It showed Amara walking up to the mansion's back gate, setting down a piece of bread and kneeling to feed the stray. The caption read, "The woman he fired, the kindness he didn't see." For once the cameras weren't on him because of his brilliance, but because of his cruelty. Ethan sat in his office, surrounded by screens filled with headlines and comment threads. Each one sliced at him. His phone buzzed non-stop. Board members, investors, journalists, PR managers, all demanding damage control. Gregory stood by the window, voice low. "Sir, this is bad. Stock's already down 4 points since morning." Ethan barely looked up. His eyes were fixed on the paused video frame. Amara's silhouette kneeling in the gray dawn, her face gentle even in pixelated form. "How did this get out?" he asked flatly. "The gardener," Gregory admitted. "He says he didn't mean for it to blow up. Just wanted to show the world the truth." Ethan's fist tightened. "Fire him." Gregory hesitated. "With respect, sir, that might make things worse." Ethan's lips pressed thin. He didn't like feeling trapped, not by markets, not by emotions, especially not by guilt. Yet here he was, cornered by a truth he couldn't rewrite with money. Across town, in a community shelter with flickering lights and peeling paint, Amara sat curled up on a cot. The shelter coordinator, Mrs. Diaz, handed her a folded newspaper. "You're on the front page, sweetheart." Amara blinked, confused. Then she saw it. Her own image, grainy but unmistakable. The headline above it, "The Maid with the Heart of Gold." Her chest tightened. "No, no, no." Mrs. Diaz smiled sadly. "They're saying the billionaire's a monster and you're some kind of saint." Amara's throat went dry. "But I didn't want that. I didn't even know anyone was watch." "Encarda, I know, baby. The world spins fast when it smells guilt." Amara pushed the paper away. "They don't know me. They just want a story." The old woman touched her hand. "Still, maybe it's your turn for a little justice." But Amara didn't want justice that came dressed in pity. By evening, Ethan's mansion had become a fortress of silence. Paparazzi swarmed the gates, drones hovered overhead, and social media pulsed with hashtags demanding accountability. His PR manager, a sleek woman named Dana, arrived with a crisis plan. "Ethan, we need to issue a statement immediately," she said, flipping open her tablet. "Something remorseful but strategic. Maybe a donation to shelters, an apology video, a—" "No," Ethan interrupted, voice low. Dana blinked. "No? The board? I'm not going to buy forgiveness." She hesitated. "Then what are you going to do?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window toward the distant city lights. Somewhere out there, she was sleeping on a cot, hungry again, while the world turned her pain into spectacle. He could almost hear his mother's voice in the back of his mind. Soft, gentle, like the melody she used to hum while tending her garden. "Be kind, Ethan, even when it hurts." For the first time in years, that memory made him close his eyes. The next day, Amara stepped outside the shelter into the morning chill. Reporters waited on the sidewalk, shouting questions, flashing cameras in her face. "Amara, do you plan to sue Mr. Lockhart? Did he ever apologize? Are you going to tell your story on television?" She flinched at every click and flash, trying to hide her face behind her arm. "No comment," she whispered. "Please, just leave me alone." But they didn't. Fame didn't care about permission. By afternoon, she was trembling in the shelter bathroom, gripping the sink. The reflection staring back at her looked nothing like her, just a scared girl being turned into someone else's headline. She thought about her mother's words. "Don't let the world decide. Be who you are." And she knew she had to leave before they took her story completely. That night, when everyone was asleep, she packed her few belongings, a Bible, a photo of her mother, and her old uniform, and slipped out quietly. Ethan found out 2 days later. He had sent his assistant to deliver an apology letter and a check, large enough to change her life. But the shelter said she'd disappeared. "Left in the night," Mrs. Diaz told him when he showed up in person. "Didn't even take breakfast. Just said she was tired of being seen and wanted to start over somewhere no one knew her name." Ethan's heart sank. He stood there in his expensive coat, surrounded by cracked walls and the smell of stale coffee, realizing for the first time that money couldn't fix this. He left his business card on the counter. "If she comes back, please tell her I'm sorry." Mrs. Diaz watched him go. "You look like a man who's only now starting to see himself." He didn't answer. He just walked out into the rain, coat unbuttoned, tie loose, the weight of 1,000 regrets pressing on his chest. That night, back in his mansion, Ethan opened the security footage again. He watched Amara feeding the dog over and over. The tenderness in her movements, the patience, the humility. Then he paused the video and looked at himself in the reflection of the screen. He saw a man who had everything except peace. The mansion was silent. His phone buzzed again. Gregory, no doubt, or another investor panicking about the backlash. He turned it off. Then, quietly, almost impulsively, he packed a small bag, grabbed his car keys, and left. He didn't know exactly where she'd gone, only that he needed to find her. Somewhere out there, a woman he'd destroyed was still feeding the hungry. And for the first time in his life, he wanted to understand what made a person like that exist in a world like his. Rain beat softly against the windshield as Ethan drove through the edges of Atlanta, past flickering streetlights and rows of boarded-up shops. The city felt different from the polished skyline he knew. This was the side that wealth pretended not to see. The roads were cracked, the signs faded, the air heavy with quiet struggle. He parked near a rundown diner that stayed open late and asked around, flashing Amara's photo from the security video. Most people shrugged, others just stared. Finally, a teenage waitress looked up from wiping the counter. "I've seen her," she said. "She comes by sometimes. Buys coffee if she's got change. Real quiet girl." "When was the last time?" "2 nights ago." The waitress tilted her head toward a small park across the street. "Said she was headed that way. Slept near the benches, I think. She was with that stray dog again." Ethan's chest tightened. "Thank you." He left a $100 bill on the counter and walked into the wet night. The park was mostly empty except for the whisper of rain and the rustle of trees. Near the far bench, under a flickering street lamp, he saw her, Amara, curled up beneath a thin blanket, the dog pressed against her side. For a moment he couldn't move. She looked so small, fragile, yet there was something in her face, even in sleep, that carried strength. He approached slowly, his shoes splashing through puddles. The dog stirred first, growling low. Amara opened her eyes, blinking through the haze of sleep and rain. Her body stiffened when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, voice hoarse. He stopped a few feet away. "I came to find you." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Why?" "Because I need to say what I should have said that night." Her gaze was cold now, not shy like before. "You mean after you called me a stray? After you threw me out like garbage?" His throat tightened. "Yes, after that." "You think an apology changes that?" He didn't flinch. "No, but maybe it's a start." She looked away, the rain running down her face like tears she refused to shed. "You shouldn't be here, Mr. Lockhart. People like you don't belong in places like this." "Maybe that's the problem," he said quietly. Maybe I've spent my whole life not belonging anywhere real. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft patter of rain and the distant hum of traffic. Then, without looking at him, Amara murmured, "The world only saw a story. They didn't see the truth." He frowned. "What truth?" "I wasn't eating trash because I liked it," she said, voice trembling. "I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I'd just lost my last job. My mom used to tell me that hunger makes people do strange things, but it doesn't make them less human." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know that now." "Do you?" She finally looked at him, and her eyes were like fire and grief all at once. "Because when you saw me that night, you didn't see a person, you saw a problem." Her words hit him harder than any headline ever could. "I saw myself," he said softly. She frowned. "What?" "I saw the part of me I've spent years trying to bury. The weakness, the need. You were everything I couldn't admit I used to be." For the first time, she seemed to hesitate. "Used to be?" He nodded. "Before my mother died, I wasn't like this. She cared for everyone, no matter how broken they were. When she got sick, I built this empire, thinking if I could control everything, I wouldn't lose anything again. But I lost myself instead." Amara looked down at the dog, who had nestled back against her side. "Maybe you should stop trying to fix things with money." "I didn't come with money," he said. "I came with shame." The way he said it, raw, almost broken, made her chest ache despite herself. She hated that she could feel sorry for him. She didn't want to, but there was something in his voice that wasn't performance. "You should go home," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Will you let me help you find one first?" Her expression hardened. "I don't need your charity." "I know, but maybe I can help you get a real job, somewhere safe, somewhere that isn't the street." She was silent for a long time, rain dripping from her braids. Then she shook her head. "People like me don't get saved by people like you, not without paying for it later." He didn't argue. He simply took off his coat, the expensive one that probably cost more than everything she owned, and laid it beside her. "For the dog, then," he said. Then he turned and walked away before she could respond. 2 days passed. The video kept spreading, but the conversation began to shift. People started asking who Amara really was, not the viral saint, but the woman behind the camera. One morning, Mrs. Diaz from the shelter spotted her walking downtown and called out, "Amara, you have to see this!" She handed her a tablet showing a live feed from a local news station. Ethan Lockhart was there, in front of microphones, looking nothing like the polished billionaire the world knew. He wore no tie, his hair slightly disheveled, eyes heavy with fatigue. "I've hurt someone," he said simply. "Not just through words, but through the kind of blindness wealth breeds. The woman I fired showed more humanity in one moment of hunger than I've shown in years of abundance. Her name is Amara Johnson, and I owe her more than an apology. I owe her the truth. That I was wrong." Gasps rippled through the audience. Ethan took a breath, voice cracking slightly. "I've always said I built my empire from nothing, but that's not true. I built it on people who had nothing, people like her, and now I intend to do something about it." Amara's heart thudded painfully. Mrs. Diaz whispered, "Seems the storm's changing direction, huh?" But Amara wasn't sure. She turned off the video, eyes stinging. The world was seeing him differently now, but she wasn't ready to. Not yet. Because no matter how public his words were, forgiveness wasn't something you earned in front of cameras. It had to be proven in silence. And for both of them, that silence was just beginning. The auditorium was filled with the sound of quiet breathing. Hundreds of journalists, investors, and employees staring at the billionaire who suddenly looked human. Ethan Lockhart stood on stage, hands trembling slightly as he gripped the podium. The giant company logo behind him, the Lockhart emblem, glowed in sterile blue light. But his voice, low and raw, cut through that cold perfection like a crack in glass. "I used to think success meant control," he said. "That if I worked harder, earned more, built higher walls, I could outrun the things that hurt." He paused, eyes flicking toward the cameras. "But the night I saw Amara Johnson, hungry, humiliated, and still kind, I realized I'd become the very thing my mother raised me not to be. His voice broke on the last word. A silence rippled through the room. The kind of silence that doesn't come from shock but from recognition. People leaned forward. The billionaire's armor was falling off in real time. He looked down, chest heaving. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to stop being proud of the monster I became. He stepped away from the microphone, turning to leave, but one of the reporters called out, Mr. Lockhart, have you spoken to Amara Johnson since the incident? Ethan stopped. I've tried, he said softly. But she has no reason to trust me. Not yet. Then he walked off stage. The crowd erupted. Questions, flashes, murmurs, but Ethan didn't look back. That same moment, several blocks away, Amara sat in a small cafe, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. The TV above the counter replayed Ethan's speech, the sound low, but unmistakable. A man sitting near her glanced at the screen. You see this? Bye. A billionaire crying on live TV. Guess guilt finally caught up to him. Amara didn't answer. Her heart was thudding too loud for words. When the clip ended, the TV cut to a panel of commentators. They were already debating whether Ethan's breakdown was sincere or strategic. Some called it bravery. Others called it damage control. But Amara didn't care what they thought. She cared about the look on his face, the way his voice had cracked when he said her name. It wasn't just shame. It was grief. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that scared her more than his anger ever had. 2 nights later, Amara was back in the park. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because it was the only place she could think clearly. The stray dog, now a little healthier, lay beside her feet, gnawing on a bone she'd managed to buy with tips from washing dishes at the cafe. She whispered to the dog, "You're the only one who doesn't look at me like a headline." A voice answered softly from behind her, "Maybe that's because he doesn't read the news." She turned. Ethan stood a few yards away, dressed simply in jeans and a gray sweater, no bodyguards, no cameras, just him. Her pulse jumped. "How did you find me again?" He lifted a small brown bag. "I asked around. The lady at the diner said you still feed him here every night." Amara said nothing. He stepped closer, kneeling a few feet away. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the ground was still damp. He placed the bag gently between them. "It's not money," he said. "It's food. Fresh." She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were 2 sandwiches, a bottle of water, and a few slices of cooked chicken. She tore off a piece and handed it to the dog first. Only after it started eating did she take a bite herself. Ethan watched her quietly. "You didn't have to share." She shrugged. "He's hungrier." He smiled faintly, something softer in his expression now. "You always think of others first." Her eyes lifted to his. "And you always used to think of yourself first." He nodded. "I deserved that." For a long while they just sat there, the city murmuring around them. Finally Amara asked, "Why did you do it? The public speech?" He exhaled. "Because silence was easier. And I've lived too long choosing easy things." "You could have just moved on. You're rich enough to forget me." He looked down at his hands. "That's the thing. I tried. I couldn't." Something fragile passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest beginning of understanding. Amara looked away. "You think a few tears on TV will change what people like me go through every day?" "No," he said quietly. "But maybe it'll make people like me start noticing." She studied his face, searching for the arrogance that once lived there. It wasn't gone completely, but it was different now, tamed by remorse. She sighed, wrapping her arms around her knees. "You hurt me, Ethan. I know. Not just that night, the way you looked at me. Like I wasn't even human." His voice broke. "I see you now. I swear I do." The wind carried their words away. Then Amara whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe one day I'll believe you." He nodded, accepting that. "If that day ever comes, I'll still be here." They sat together until the city lights dimmed, 2 people from opposite worlds, sharing silence thick with things unspoken. And when he finally stood to leave, he said one last thing. There's a project my mother started before she passed. A community kitchen. She wanted to call it the second table. It's been closed for years. I'd like to reopen it. Not for me, for you. Amara looked up sharply. For me? He smiled sadly. You're the reason I remembered what it's for. She wanted to tell him no, to reject it. But something in her heart softened, not toward him, but toward the possibility that something good could grow from something terrible. He didn't answer. She just whispered, "Good night, Ethan." And for the first time, he didn't correct her, didn't command, didn't demand. He simply bowed his head and said, "Good night, Amara." That night, as she fed the last crumbs to the dog, Amara felt something she hadn't felt in months, a quiet flicker of hope, not for him, for herself. The reopening of the second table began not with a press release, but with silence. No cameras, no banners, no PR campaign, just a handful of volunteers, a few chipped pots, and the smell of simmering soup drifting through the cracked windows of the old brick building Ethan's mother had once used for her outreach projects. Amara arrived early that morning, nervous. The sunlight slanted through the dusty panes, catching the steam rising from the pots. Her hands shook as she tied her apron, not from fear of the work, but from what it meant. It had been 2 weeks since Ethan's public apology, and she hadn't seen him since that night in the park. She'd almost convinced herself he'd moved on. Then, 2 days ago, she received a handwritten note slipped under the cafe door where she worked. The kitchen opens this Friday. It's yours if you want it. No cameras, no contracts, just a chance to make it right. The signature was simple, E.L. Now, standing inside the once-forgotten building, she wondered if she'd been foolish to come. A voice behind her said softly, "You came." She turned. Ethan stood at the doorway, sleeves rolled up, holding a crate of fresh vegetables. His hair was tousled, his shirt damp from carrying boxes. He looked different. Not the billionaire with marble walls and perfect posture, just a man trying to build something real. "I almost didn't," she admitted. "I wouldn't have blamed you." He set the crate down and began washing his hands at the old steel sink. "You don't owe me anything, Amara. This place, it's yours. You decide how it runs, who it feeds. I just reopened the doors." Amara hesitated. "And what do you want out of it?" "Not thing," he said quietly, "except maybe to learn what kindness actually looks like." There was no performance in his tone, no pity either, just weariness. She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the chopping board. "Can you cook?" He smiled faintly. "I can try." "Good," she said. "Start with onions. They're honest. They make everyone cry." By noon, the kitchen was alive. Volunteers from the shelter, a few local teens, and even Mrs. Diaz filled the space with laughter and chatter. Pots clanged, steam hissed, and the first meals were ladled out to a line forming outside. People who hadn't had a hot lunch in days. Ethan moved quietly among them, sleeves rolled, apron stained. He handed out bowls, carried crates, and listened more than he spoke. Once Amara caught him kneeling to tie a child's shoelace as he handed the boy a bowl of soup. It startled her, the simple gentleness of it. Later, when the rush slowed, she walked over and handed him a glass of water. "You're not bad at this," she said softly. He chuckled. "I used to think charity was just writing checks. Turns out it's sweat too. You'll ruin your designer reputation." He looked around at the crowd, his voice low. "Maybe it's worth ruining." For a moment their eyes met, and there was warmth there, something unspoken and delicate. As the day ended, Amara stood outside, watching the last few guests leave with full stomachs and tired smiles. The sun dipped behind the city skyline, bathing the street in a golden hue. Ethan joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. "You did this," he said. She shook her head. "We did this." He smiled. "You're generous, even with credit." "I've had to be," she said quietly. "When the world doesn't see you, you learn to make space for others." He was silent for a while, then asked, "Why did you really come today?" Amara looked out at the street. "Because I wanted to see if you were serious." "And am I?" She turned to face him. "You're getting there." He smiled faintly, a tired, grateful smile. That's more than I deserve. Before she could respond, a car screeched to a halt across the street. Flashbulbs erupted, reporters drawn by whispers of the second table reopening. "Mr. Lockhart," one shouted, "is this part of your image rehabilitation? Are you working with your former maid?" Ethan's jaw tensed. He started to step forward, but Amara touched his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Let them talk." The cameras zoomed in, capturing the image of a billionaire and a black woman standing side by side outside a soup kitchen. But what they couldn't capture was the truth. The quiet defiance in Amara's eyes, the humility in Ethan's posture, the fragile bridge forming between them. One reporter yelled, "Amara, are you forgiving him?" She met the camera's gaze calmly. "Forgiveness isn't a headline," she said. "It's a process." The crowd murmured, stunned by her poise. Ethan looked at her like she'd just handed him back a piece of his soul. Then she walked back inside, leaving him to face the flashing lights alone. He turned to the reporters, voice firm. "This isn't about me anymore. Write that down." And then, without another word, he followed her inside and closed the door. That night, after everyone had gone, Amara sat on the steps of the kitchen, legs drawn close, the dog sleeping beside her. Ethan joined her quietly, 2 cups of tea in hand. "You handled them better than I ever could," he said, handing her one. She smiled faintly. "You're learning." They sipped in silence. The street was quiet now, save for the hum of distant traffic. Ethan finally spoke. "You know, for years I thought being powerful meant never needing anyone. And now? Now I think power is useless if you can't make someone's life a little less hard." She turned to look at him. "Really look. You mean that?" He nodded. "Every wuta. But..." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled softly. "Then maybe you're finally starting to understand what my mother used to say." "What's that?" She said, "The richest people are the ones who can share what little they have." He looked at her, eyes tired but alive, and whispered, "Then you've been rich all along." For the first time, Amara didn't look away. Inside, the soup kitchen lights glowed warm against the dark city. 2 silhouettes sat together on the steps, one born into wealth, one born into struggle. And for a moment, they looked like equals. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, they weren't afraid of it, because maybe forgiveness didn't come all at once. Maybe it came like soup, one bowl at a time. The following weeks changed everything. What began as a humble effort between 2 broken people became something bigger than either of them expected. The second table became a living heartbeat in the city, a place where the hungry, the lonely, and even the skeptical found something they hadn't tasted in a long time: warmth. And the press noticed. At first, headlines tried to twist it into spectacle. "Billionaire redeems himself by feeding the poor." From scandal to salvation, Ethan Lockhart's unlikely partner, the maid, he shamed. But those who came to the soup kitchen saw the truth for themselves. Ethan didn't arrive with photographers anymore. He came early, stayed late, scrubbed pots, peeled carrots. His once polished hands grew rough from work. Amara, on the other hand, moved with quiet command, delegating, teaching, laughing with the volunteers. She wasn't the timid girl who had once trembled in the marble halls of a mansion. She had grown into someone who knew her worth. Still, not everyone approved. That Thursday evening, as the last bowls were served, a black SUV pulled up outside. A tall woman in a sleek gray coat stepped out, flanked by 2 men in suits. It was Victoria Langford, Ethan's business partner, and the closest thing to an older sister he had in the corporate world. Her expression was icy, precise. "Ethan," she said sharply, stepping inside. "We need to talk." Amara glanced up from the counter, sensing the tension immediately. Ethan wiped his hands, motioning for her to wait, then followed Victoria outside. The air was cold. A light drizzle misted the street as Victoria turned to face him. "Are you out of your mind?" she hissed. "You're on the verge of losing half your investors. Do you even realize what you're doing?" "I'm feeding people," Ethan replied evenly. "You're ruining yourself," she snapped. "There's a difference between charity and self-destruction, Ethan. The board thinks you've lost control. They're considering removing you from your own company." He went still. "Let them," he said finally. Victoria blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said let them," he repeated, quieter now. If keeping my position means being the kind of man I was, then I'd rather lose it. She stared at him, baffled. This isn't you. You don't belong in a soup kitchen with... She caught herself before finishing the sentence. With her? He asked softly. Victoria hesitated. With people like that? There it was. The line. The invisible wall Amara had always lived behind. Ethan's voice dropped, cold and steady. People like that are the only ones who've taught me what decency looks like. Victoria's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. Maybe, he said, but at least I'll regret something worth doing. He turned and walked back inside, leaving her standing in the drizzle. Amara was wiping the counters when he returned. Everything okay? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not really, but it will be. She looked up at him, the exhaustion, the quiet defiance in his eyes. She knew what had happened. She'd seen that look before, in men forced to choose between comfort and conscience. Then we'll make it worth it, she said simply. He smiled faintly. You always say things like that, like it's easy. It's not easy, she said, meeting his gaze. It's right. And somehow, that was enough. A week later, it happened. News broke that Ethan Lockhart had officially been voted out as CEO of Lockhart Developments. The same empire he had inherited and expanded was now beyond his control. The media called it a shocking fall from grace. But while his name trended online for all the wrong reasons, something else happened offline. A line of people stretched down the block outside the second table. Donations poured in. Volunteers tripled. Even local restaurants began offering supplies. And through it all, Ethan stayed at Amara's side. He chopped vegetables. He laughed with the kids. He washed dishes until his fingers pruned. He was no longer Mr. Lockhart. He was just Ethan, a man who had lost everything except his ability to care. One night, after a long shift, Amara found him sitting alone in the back kitchen, staring at his phone. The light from the screen glowed against his tired face. Bad news? She asked softly. He didn't look up. They're auctioning off the penthouse next week. Everything's gone, Amara. Every part of the life I built. She set down her dish towel and came closer. Then build something new. He gave a short laugh. With what? With this, she said, motioning around. With these hands, with these people, with what you've learned. He looked up finally, eyes wet, voice breaking. And what have I learned? That redemption doesn't mean getting your life back, she said. It means becoming someone who deserves it. He swallowed hard. For a moment his expression cracked, all, the years of pride and distance melting into something fragile. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Amara smiled gently. Then start by deserving yourself. And in that small kitchen, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not love, not yet. But a fragile thread of understanding, the kind that might one day hold. 2 days later, the city hosted its annual Winter Feast, a community dinner for those in need, sponsored by wealthy donors. But this year, the committee called the second table to help serve. Amara and Ethan stood side by side beneath the bright hall lights, wearing plain aprons while city leaders in suits and dresses paraded through with wine glasses. Whispers followed them. That's him. The fallen billionaire, and her, the maid. But Amara ignored it. She ladled soup, smiled at every guest, and treated each one like royalty. Ethan followed her lead. At one point, an old man in a ragged coat took his hand and said, You used to look down at us from your tower. Now you're one of us. Ethan smiled, eyes warm. No, he said quietly. Now I'm finally looking with you. The hall fell silent for a moment. People stopped to watch, to feel. Even the donors, who came to play savior, saw something real happening. And as the evening went on, a murmur spread, a strange, gentle reverence, for the man who had fallen, and the woman who had taught him what grace looked like. By the time they locked up that night, Amara and Ethan stood outside, under the pale glow of street lamps. You handled them well, she said softly. He looked at her with quiet gratitude. You handled me well. She smiled. That was the hard part. He laughed, and for once, it wasn't bitter or hollow. It was light, the sound of someone finally unburdened. And though the night was cold, they didn't feel it. Because some nights, redemption was its own kind of warmth. The city woke to rain the morning. The second table celebrated its one-year anniversary. Fat, gentle drops slid down the fogged windows of the soup kitchen, tapping softly against the glass as though keeping time with the slow hum of life inside. Steam rose from pots of stew, laughter mingled with the smell of fresh bread. Amara stood by the stove, stirring carefully, her hair tied back in a loose bun. Her hands had changed over the year, calloused from work, yes, but stronger, steadier. There was a quiet confidence about her now, the kind that doesn't ask to be noticed but cannot be ignored. Ethan entered, shaking off an umbrella, his once tailored coat now patched at the elbows. He wasn't the same man who had screamed at her in a marble kitchen months ago. The sharpness in him had softened, replaced by something humbler and real. "Full house again," he said, nodding toward the crowd gathering outside. "Word travels fast when there's food and kindness," she replied with a small smile. He grinned. "Two things you've got in abundance." She shot him a look over her shoulder. "And what about you?" He shrugged, teasing. "I bring dishwashing expertise." She laughed, shaking her head, but her laughter faltered when she saw the distant look in his eyes. Something thoughtful, almost sorrowful. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then said, "Lockhart Developments is gone. Completely dissolved. The board sold off the last divisions yesterday." Amara set the spoon down. "I'm sorry." He smiled faintly. "Don't be. It was time." Then, quieter. "I thought losing it would break me. But now that it's gone, I feel lighter." She nodded. "Sometimes the weight we think is holding us up is what's actually keeping us down." He chuckled softly. "You always know what to say." "It's the soup," she said. "It makes me philosophical." That afternoon, the second table was busier than ever. Journalists had come, not to mock, but to celebrate. The mayor had sent flowers. Former employees of Lockhart Developments even arrived, volunteering as shies. In silence beside the very people they once ignored. A local reporter approached Amara for an interview. "Miss Reed, everyone knows your story," she began gently. "The humiliation, the scandal, and now this. Tell me, what changed?" Amara smiled faintly, glancing toward Ethan, who was wiping tables beside a group of children. "People did," she said. "When you stop judging someone by what they have and start seeing what they're capable of giving, that's when things change." The reporter nodded, touched. "And Ethan Lockhart?" Amara's gaze lingered on him for a long moment. "He found what money couldn't buy. That's all anyone really wants, isn't it?" Later, as dusk settled, the crowd thinned. Only a few volunteers remained, cleaning up. Ethan stood by the door, watching the last guest leave, a small boy with a paper bowl of stew and a bright smile. When he turned back, Amara was standing in the kitchen doorway, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You're thinking too much again," she said softly, handing him one. "Maybe," he admitted. "I was just remembering the first day I saw you here. You were so nervous, could barely look me in the eye." She smirked. "And you were the angriest man alive." He laughed quietly. "Sounds about right." There was a long pause, filled with the rain's steady rhythm. Then he said, almost to himself, "Do you ever think, if that day hadn't happened, the trash, the shouting, the shame, none of this would exist?" Amara's expression softened. "Pain builds strange bridges, Ethan. Sometimes it's the only thing that forces us to cross." He nodded slowly. "You think I've changed?" "I think you've become," she said. "And that's harder." He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. "You saved me." She smiled sadly. "No. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you look away while you did it." Thunder rumbled outside, low and distant. The lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the room was dark, just 2 silhouettes in the dim glow of a city beyond the rain. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after a while. "There's a building downtown. One the company never finished. The board never sold it. I could turn it into something new. A training center maybe, for people who've been overlooked like you were. Not charity. Opportunity. Amara blinked, surprised. You'd do that? I already started drafting the proposal. She shook her head, smiling. You really don't stop, do you? He shrugged. Guess I finally learned what it means to build something worth standing in. Amara stepped closer, eyes warm. Then I'll be there. Not to work for you this time, but with you. He smiled, a slow, quiet, genuine smile. I wouldn't have it any other way. Later that night, when everyone had gone, Amara walked through the empty dining room. The tables were clean, the floors shining faintly under the low lights. She paused by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked street. Her reflection stared back, the same face, but not the same woman. No longer a maid hiding in corners. No longer a girl ashamed of hunger. A survivor. A teacher. A giver. Ethan joined her silently, standing beside her. Their reflections met in the glass. Two lives that had collided, broken, and rebuilt. You know, he said softly, for a long time I thought redemption would feel like applause. And now? Now it feels like peace. Amara smiled. Peace suits you. They stood there in silence for a long moment, the sound of rain against the glass, the faint hum of the city beyond. Then Ethan said, almost a whisper, I'm sorry again, for everything. Amara turned toward him. I forgave you a long time ago, Ethan. I just needed you to forgive yourself. He nodded, eyes glistening. And then, without needing to, she reached out and took his hand. Not in romance, but in recognition. Two people bound not by what they'd lost, but by what they'd learned. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. The last light flickered out inside the second table, leaving only the faint glow of its sign. Everyone deserves a second table. And in the quiet that followed, something sacred lingered, the kind of peace that comes only after fire. The billionaire had fallen, the maid had risen. But in the end, they stood on the same ground, equal, forgiven, and finally free.